The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the marble floor as Clara hurried through the grand hallway of Blackthorne Palace, her arms laden with fresh linens. Her worn leather boots made soft clicking sounds against the polished stone, a rhythm she'd grown accustomed to over the past 3 years of servitude. The ornate walls, adorned with centuries-old paintings of stern-faced nobles, seemed to watch her every move with disapproving eyes. "Clara!" The sharp voice cut through the silence like a blade, causing her to freeze mid-step. Prince Scott Blackthorne emerged from the shadows of a doorway, his imposing figure silhouetted against the dim light filtering through the stained glass windows. Even in the muted lighting, his pale skin seemed to glow with an otherworldly luminescence, and his dark hair fell carelessly across his forehead, framing eyes that held depths she couldn't quite fathom. "Your Highness," she whispered, dropping into a curtsy despite the heavy bundle in her arms. The linens shifted precariously, and she struggled to maintain her balance. Scott's jaw tightened as he watched her struggle. "You're late with the evening preparations. My father expects perfection, not the fumbling efforts of a careless servant." His words were harsh, but Clara caught something flickering in his dark eyes, something that looked almost like regret. "I apologize, Your Highness. I was attending to the library cleaning as you requested this morning, and—" "I don't want your excuses," he cut her off, stepping closer. The scent of sandalwood and something indefinably masculine wafted from him, making her pulse quicken despite his cruel words. "Perhaps a reminder of your place here would serve you well." Clara's heart sank. She knew what was coming, another impossible task, another reason for him to find fault with her work. It had been this way since she'd first arrived at the palace, desperate and broken, begging for the money to save her dying mother. "The East Wing needs to be thoroughly cleaned tonight. Every room, every surface. You have until dawn." His lips curved into what might have been a smile on anyone else, but on Prince Scott, it looked more like a predator baring his teeth. "But Your Highness, that's impossible for one person to." "Then perhaps you should have thought of that before disappointing me." He turned on his heel, his long black coat billowing behind him like wings. "Oh, and Clara." He paused without looking back. "When you're finished, report to my study. We need to discuss your arrangement here." As his footsteps echoed down the corridor, Clara felt tears prick at her eyes. 3 years. 3 years since her mother had died despite all Clara's desperate efforts to save her. 3 years since she'd thrown herself at the mercy of the mysterious Prince Scott, begging for the money for her mother's surgery. He'd given it to her without question, but when her mother passed away anyway, Clara found herself bound to him by a debt she could never repay. "Serve me until your debt is cleared," he had said, his voice cold and final. But the debt never seemed to shrink, no matter how hard she worked, no matter how perfectly she performed her duties. Some days, she wondered if he was keeping her here for reasons that had nothing to do with money. The east wing of Blackthorne Palace was a maze of unused guest rooms and forgotten chambers, each filled with antique furniture draped in white sheets like ghosts of a bygone era. Clara had been working for hours, her hands raw from scrubbing, her back aching from bending over endless surfaces. The grandfather clock in the main corridor had chimed midnight long ago, and still she worked, determined to complete the impossible task Prince Scott had set for her. As she entered what appeared to be an old sitting room, something caught her eye. Unlike the other rooms, this one felt different, lived in, somehow. The furniture wasn't covered, and personal items were scattered about: books, a leather jacket draped over a chair, a crystal tumbler half filled with what looked like wine on a side table. Clara froze as realization dawned. This was Prince Scott's private sanctuary, a place she'd never been meant to find. She should leave immediately, but something drew her further into the room. On the mantelpiece sat a collection of photographs, and her breath caught in her throat as she recognized the faces in them. Her parents. Her father, tall and elegant with aristocratic features, stood beside her mother, who was glowing with happiness in a simple white dress. They were young, perhaps even younger than Clara was now, and so deeply in love that it radiated from the image. I was wondering when you'd find this room. Clara spun around, her heart hammering against her ribs. Prince Scott stood in the doorway, but he looked different somehow. The cruel mask he usually wore had slipped, revealing something vulnerable and almost lonely. "I'm sorry, Your Highness. I didn't mean to intrude. I was just cleaning, and I..." "Stop." He held up a hand, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. "We're alone here, Clara. No servants, no courtiers, no watchful eyes. Just us." He moved to the mantelpiece, his fingers trailing over the photograph she'd been staring at. "Do you recognize them?" Clara's throat felt dry. They look like my parents. But that's impossible. My father died when I was a baby, and my mother never spoke of him." Scott's laugh was bitter. "Your mother was wise to keep you hidden. If she'd told you the truth, you would have been dead before your first birthday." He turned to face her, and in the soft lamplight, his features seemed sharper, more defined. "More dangerous. Your father was Dimitri Blackthorne, my uncle. He was meant to be king." The world seemed to tilt beneath Clara's feet. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that you, Clara Blackthorne, are not just some serving girl working off a debt. You're the rightful heir to the vampire throne." His eyes gleamed in the lamplight, and for a moment, Clara could have sworn she saw fangs glinting behind his lips. "Vampire." The word came out as barely a whisper. That's impossible. Vampires aren't real." Scott moved with inhuman speed, appearing before her in the blink of an eye. His hand cupped her face gently, thumb tracing along her cheekbone. "Look at me, Clara. Really look at me." As she stared into his eyes, the truth became undeniable. The pale skin, the way he moved like liquid shadow, the fact that she'd never seen him during daylight hours. And something else, something stirring in her own blood, awakening after years of dormancy. "My father killed yours when you were 6 months old," Scott continued, his voice thick with emotion. "Dimitri had married a human, your mother, and my father saw it as a betrayal of our kind. He staged a coup, murdered your father, and drove your mother into hiding. She did whatever it took to keep you safe, including suppressing your vampire nature with herbs and potions." Clara pulled away from his touch, her mind reeling. "Why are you telling me this? And why?" She searched his face, seeing him clearly for the first time. "Why do you hate me so much?" Something cracked in Scott's carefully constructed facade. His shoulders sagged, and he turned away from her. "Because I don't hate you at all. God help me, I've been in love with you since the moment you walked into this palace, desperate and beautiful and so heartbreakingly human. But I knew that if you ever learned what I was, what we are, you'd run. And if my father discovered how I felt about you, he'd kill me," Clara finished softly. Without hesitation. Scott's voice was rough with suppressed emotion. "So I tried to make you hate me. I thought if I was cruel enough, cold enough, you'd despise me so completely that I could convince myself to let you go." Clara's heart ached at the pain in his voice. All those harsh words, all those impossible tasks, they'd been his twisted way of protecting her. "Scott." He whirled around, his eyes blazing. Don't say my name like that. Not when I've spent 3 years trying to convince myself that keeping you here was about the debt and not about the fact that I can't bear the thought of you leaving." The space between them seemed to crackle with electricity. Clara took a step forward, then another, until she was close enough to see the golden flecks in his dark eyes. "What if I don't want to leave? Clara, you don't understand. My world is dangerous. My father. Your father stole my birthright," she said, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. He murdered my father and drove my mother into exile. Maybe it's time someone challenged him." Scott stared at her in amazement. "You're awakening. I can see it, the vampire blood recognizing its heritage." He reached out tentatively, his fingertips barely grazing her cheek. "You're magnificent." The gentle touch sent shivers through Clara's entire body. For 3 years, she'd been drawn to this complicated, tortured man despite his cruelty. Now, seeing the real Scott beneath the mask, understanding the impossible position he'd been in, her heart opened completely. "I don't hate you," she whispered. "I could never hate you." Scott's control finally snapped. He pulled her against him, his mouth crushing down on hers with 3 years of suppressed longing. Clara melted into the kiss, her hands fisting in his shirt as she kissed him back with equal desperation. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "This changes everything," Scott murmured against her lips. "Good," Clara replied fiercely. "I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of pretending to be something I'm not." Over the following weeks, Clara's transformation was remarkable. As her vampire heritage awakened, she grew stronger, faster, more graceful. Her senses sharpened, and with them came memories that had been locked away, fragments of her early childhood, flashes of her father's face, the sound of her mother's terrified whispers as she prepared their escape. Scott trained with her in secret, teaching her to harness her newfound abilities. They met in the abandoned sections of the palace, away from prying eyes, and what had begun as combat lessons often dissolved into heated embraces and whispered confessions of love. "You're a natural," Scott said one evening as Clara effortlessly scaled the wall of the old ballroom. "Your father was the same way, graceful, powerful, born to lead." Clara dropped to the floor beside him, her eyes bright with exertion and something else, a growing confidence in who she was becoming. "Tell me about him. About what really happened." Scott's expression darkened. Dimitri was everything a vampire king should be. Fair, strong, protective of both our kind and humans. When he married your mother, it wasn't seen as a betrayal by everyone, many of us believed it showed vision, a willingness to evolve. But my father, he clenched his fists. My father is old-fashioned. He believes in the supremacy of pure vampire blood, in ruling through fear rather than respect. "And you?" Clara asked softly. "What do you believe?" Scott looked at her with such love and admiration that it took her breath away. "I believe in you. I believe in the future you could create, a world where love matters more than bloodlines, where strength comes from compassion rather than cruelty." Their stolen moments of happiness couldn't last forever. King Aldrich Blackthorne was many things, but he wasn't blind. He began to notice the change in his son, the way Scott's cruelty toward the serving girl had softened, the way he seemed distracted during court proceedings. The confrontation came on a storm-lashed evening in late autumn. Clara was in Scott's study, curled in his lap as he read to her from an ancient text about vampire history, when the doors burst open. King Aldrich strode in, his presence filling the room with cold menace. "How touching," the king sneered, his pale eyes taking in the intimate scene. "My son, heir to the vampire throne, cavorting with a servant." Scott stood slowly, positioning himself protectively in front of Clara. "Father. Don't father me, you fool. Do you think I don't know what's been happening? Do you think I can't smell her awakening blood?" Aldrich's gaze fixed on Clara, and she saw recognition flicker in his eyes. Well. Dimitri's whelp, all grown up. Clara felt her own power rising, responding to the threat. She stepped out from behind Scott, meeting the king's gaze steadily. "Uncle." Aldrich's face contorted with rage. "You dare claim kinship with me? Your father was a traitor, and your human mother was a whore who corrupted our bloodline. Don't speak about my parents that way." Clara's voice was quiet, but it carried an authority that made everyone in the room take notice. "I'll speak about them however I choose. Just as I'll decide your fate. Aldrich smiled coldly. Guards. The doors opened again, and several palace guards entered, their hands on their weapons. Take the girl to the dungeons. She'll be executed at dawn for the crime of impersonating nobility. No. Scott moved faster than lightning, placing himself between Clara and the guards. I won't let you hurt her. Then you'll share her fate, Aldrich said with deadly calm. I had hoped to avoid this, but you've forced my hand. If you choose this half-breed over your duty to the crown, then you're no son of mine. Good, Scott replied, his own fangs extending as he prepared to fight. I never wanted to be your son anyway. The battle that followed was fierce but brief. Scott was powerful, but he was outnumbered, and his priority was protecting Clara rather than winning. Within minutes, both he and Clara were overwhelmed and dragged to the palace dungeons. The cells beneath Blackthorne Palace were ancient, carved from solid stone and designed to hold even the strongest vampires. Clara paced her narrow cell like a caged wolf, her mind racing. In the cell beside her, Scott sat with his head in his hands. I'm sorry, he said for the 100th time. I should have found a way to protect you. I should have. Stop, Clara interrupted. This isn't your fault. If anyone should apologize, it's me. I let my emotions get the better of me. I should have been more careful. Your emotions. Scott looked up, and despite their dire circumstances, he almost smiled. Clara, you stood up to the most powerful vampire in the kingdom because he insulted your parents. That wasn't emotion, that was courage. Clara sank onto the stone bench in her cell, suddenly exhausted. Lot of good it did us. We'll be dead by morning. Maybe not. Scott's voice was thoughtful. There's something my father doesn't know. Something I've been keeping secret for years. Clara looked at him hopefully. What? Your father wasn't the only one who opposed my father's rule. There are others, vampires who believe in Dimitri's vision, who've been waiting for the right moment to act. When I was younger, before I learned to hide my true feelings, I made contact with them. They've been waiting for a sign, a leader to rally behind. And you think that leader is me? Clara laughed bitterly. I've been awake as a vampire for all of 6 weeks. I don't know the first thing about leading anyone. You don't need to know everything, Scott said gently. You just need to be who you are, Dimitri's daughter, the rightful heir. The rest will follow. As if his words had summoned them, Clara heard the soft scrape of footsteps in the corridor outside their cells. She tensed, expecting guards, but instead, a hooded figure approached. When the person lowered their hood, Clara gasped. It was Elena, one of the palace's senior servants, a woman Clara had always assumed was human. Your Highness, Elena said, bowing deeply to Clara. We've come to get you out of here. We? Clara asked. Elena smiled, revealing delicate fangs. The loyal ones. Those who remember your father and have been waiting for your return. She produced a set of keys and quickly unlocked both cells. We must hurry. The king plans to move up your execution to within the hour. They moved swiftly through secret passages Clara never knew existed, emerging finally in what appeared to be an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the palace grounds. Inside, Clara was amazed to find nearly 50 vampires waiting, servants, minor nobles, even a few guards she recognized from the palace. An elderly vampire stepped forward, his ancient eyes bright with hope. Princess Clara. You have your father's look about you. I'm not a princess, Clara protested. I'm just. You are Dimitri Blackthorne's daughter, the old vampire said firmly. You are the rightful queen of the vampires. And we are here to help you claim your throne. The next few hours passed in a blur of planning and preparation. Clara learned that the resistance had been growing for years, fueled by Aldrich's increasingly tyrannical rule. They had weapons, they had inside knowledge of the palace, and most importantly, they had hope. The coronation ceremony is tomorrow night, Elena explained. Aldrich is planning to formally name Scott as his heir, but only after you're dead. If we can disrupt the ceremony, challenge Aldrich in front of the entire vampire court. He'll have to face me in single combat, Clara finished. It's the old law. Exactly. And if you win? When she wins, Scott corrected firmly. Elena smiled. When you win, the throne passes to you by right of blood and conquest. Clara felt the weight of destiny settling on her shoulders. This was what her father had died for, what her mother had sacrificed everything to protect. Then let's end this. The night of the coronation ceremony, Blackthorne Palace was filled with vampire nobility from across the kingdom. They gathered in the great ballroom, dressed in their finest gowns and suits, unaware that history was about to be made. King Aldrich stood at the front of the room in his ceremonial robes, the ancient crown of the vampire kings glittering on his brow. Beside him, looking distinctly uncomfortable, stood Prince Scott in chains. Apparently, Aldrich had decided to make his son's execution part of the evening's entertainment. My lords and ladies, Aldrich began, his voice carrying easily through the vast room. Tonight marks a new chapter in our kingdom's history. Tonight, I name my true heir, not the son who betrayed me, but one who will uphold the pure traditions of our kind. A murmur went through the crowd. This wasn't what they'd been expecting. But first, Aldrich continued, his eyes glittering with malice, we must deal with the pretender who dared to corrupt my bloodline. The great doors at the back of the ballroom burst open, and Clara strode in, flanked by Elena and the other resistance members. She wore a simple black dress that emphasized her pale skin and dark hair, and around her throat was a silver necklace that had belonged to her father, a symbol of the true royal line. The entire ballroom fell silent. I am Clara Blackthorne, she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the stunned quiet. Daughter of Dimitri Blackthorne, rightful queen of the vampires. And I challenge Aldrich the usurper for the throne that is mine by right. Chaos erupted. Some vampires cheered, others hissed in outrage, and still others simply stared in shock. Through it all, Aldrich stood perfectly still, his face a mask of cold fury. You dare, he said finally, his voice soft but deadly. You dare enter my palace, interrupt my ceremony, and make such claims. I dare because it's the truth, Clara replied, walking slowly down the center aisle toward the throne. With each step, she felt her power growing, responding to the ancient magic woven into the very stones of the palace. You murdered my father and stole his crown. Tonight, I take it back. Aldrich laughed, but there was no humor in it. Very well, child. If you wish to die as your father died, I'll be happy to accommodate you. He raised his voice so the entire room could hear. I accept your challenge. Single combat, to the death, as is our ancient right. The crowd parted, forming a circle in the center of the ballroom. Clara stepped into it, feeling the weight of centuries of tradition. This was how vampire disputes had been settled since the beginning, not through politics or manipulation, but through strength and will. Aldrich removed his ceremonial robes, revealing the lean, powerful body of a vampire who had ruled through fear for decades. He was older, stronger, more experienced in combat. By all rights, Clara should have been terrified. Instead, she felt calm. Any last words, pretender? Aldrich asked as they circled each other. Clara smiled, and for the first time, allowed her fangs to fully extend. Just one. Justice. The fight was brutal and beautiful, a deadly dance of supernatural speed and power. Aldrich was everything Clara had expected, fast, strong, ruthless. But he had underestimated her. The blood of kings flowed in her veins, and with it came an instinctive understanding of combat that couldn't be taught. They crashed through furniture, shattered marble columns, sent the watching crowd scrambling for safety. Aldrich drew first blood, his claws raking across Clara's shoulder, but she barely felt the pain. She was fighting for more than just her life. She was fighting for her parents, for Scott, for every vampire who had suffered under Aldrich's tyranny. The end came suddenly. Aldrich, overconfident in his superiority, left himself open for just a moment. Clara moved with lethal grace, her hand punching through his chest to grasp his heart. "This is for my father," she whispered. Aldrich's eyes went wide with shock and something that might have been respect. "Long live the Queen," he gasped, before crumbling to dust. Silence fell over the ballroom like a blanket. Then, slowly, Elena stepped forward and knelt. "Long live Queen Clara." One by one, the other vampires followed suit, until the entire room was kneeling before her. Even those who had supported Aldrich recognized the legitimacy of her claim now that she had proven it in combat. Clara stood in the center of it all, barely able to believe what had just happened. She was a queen. She was free. And Scott. Scott was suddenly beside her, his chains broken, his eyes shining with love and pride. "My queen," he said softly, kneeling as well. "Get up," Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. "All of you, get up. If I'm to be your queen, it won't be one who rules from above, but one who stands with you." As the vampires rose, Clara felt the weight of the crown settling on her head, not a physical weight, but the responsibility of leadership. She thought of her parents, of the love that had transcended species and tradition, and she knew what kind of ruler she wanted to be. "The old ways die tonight," she announced. "We will no longer live in the shadows, hiding from the world. We will no longer persecute those who choose love over tradition. We are vampires, but we are also part of a larger world, and it's time we acted like it." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of change. Clara officially took the throne in a ceremony that was broadcast to vampire communities worldwide, announcing a new era of openness and cooperation. She established new laws protecting both humans and vampires, created councils that included representatives from both species, and began the careful work of revealing the vampire world to select human leaders. Through it all, Scott was beside her, not as a consort or a subordinate, but as an equal partner in building their new world. Their love story had become legend among their people, proof that the heart recognized no boundaries of species or station. On a quiet evening in spring, as they walked through the palace gardens that Clara had ordered open to the public, Scott stopped suddenly and dropped to one knee. "Clara Blackthorne," he said, producing a ring that sparkled with ancient magic, "you are my queen, my partner, my heart. Will you also be my wife?" Clara laughed, tears streaming down her face as she pulled him to his feet. "I thought you'd never ask." Their wedding was the event of the century, a celebration that lasted 3 days and was attended by dignitaries both human and vampire. They exchanged vows in the same ballroom where Clara had claimed her throne, but now it was filled with flowers and light instead of the darkness of the old regime. As they danced their first dance as husband and wife, Clara thought about the journey that had brought them here. She had started as a frightened serving girl, working to pay off an impossible debt. Now she was a queen, married to the love of her life, ruling over a kingdom that was finally free to grow and change. "Any regrets?" Scott murmured in her ear as they swayed to the music. Clara looked around at their gathered friends and subjects, at the hope and joy on every face, at the bright future stretching out before them all. "Just one," she said with a smile. Scott pulled back to look at her, concerned. "What?" "I regret that it took us so long to get here." She stood on her tiptoes to kiss him, and the ballroom erupted in cheers and applause. Later that night, as they stood on the balcony of their chambers looking out over the kingdom that was now truly theirs, Clara felt a presence beside her. She turned to see the translucent figures of her parents, smiling with pride and love. "We're so proud of you," her father said, his voice like a whisper on the wind. You've become everything we dreamed you could be, her mother added. I love you both, Clara whispered, tears streaming down her face. Thank you for giving me the strength to fight. As her parents' spirits faded back into the night, Scott wrapped his arms around Clara from behind. They're at peace now, he said softly. The circle is complete. Clara leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the heart that had chosen her over duty, over safety, over everything else in the world. Yes, she agreed. It is. In the distance, the city lights twinkled like stars, and Clara could feel the pulse of life, human and vampire alike, thriving under her protection. She had found her place in the world, her purpose, her love. The serving girl who had once scrubbed floors in fear was gone, replaced by a queen who ruled with wisdom and compassion. And as Scott pressed a gentle kiss to her temple, Clara knew that their greatest adventures were still ahead of them. Together, they would build a world where love conquered all, where the past no longer defined the future, and where every heart could find its home. The debt that had brought her to Blackthorne Palace had finally been paid, not in servitude, but in revolution, not in fear, but in love. And the interest on that payment would be felt for generations to come, in every vampire who chose love over tradition, in every human who learned that monsters could also be heroes, and in every heart that dared to hope for something better. Clara Blackthorne, once a serving girl, now a queen, had claimed not just a throne, but a destiny. And she would rule not with an iron fist, but with an open heart, forever and always. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to our channel for more captivating audiobook stories that will transport you to worlds beyond imagination. Your support means everything to creators like us who are passionate about bringing these magical stories to life. Hit that like button if this story touched your heart, share it with fellow lovers of supernatural romance, and let us know in the comments what kind of mystical adventure you'd like to hear next.